was a few guys, and then Rousimar Palhares came around. And Palhares started ripping people's legs apart. He was the first guy that I could remember ever where people were absolutely terrified to fight him because they thought they were going to get crippled. Rousimar Palhares was so good at leg locks, and he was my height, but 4 feet wider.
Yes.
He was built like a tree. They called him Tree Trunk. That was his nickname was Toquinho. I guess that means tree trunk. This motherfucker would grab your leg and so quick with heel hooks and then not let go when you tapped. He was also the first guy that I know of that won a fight and got released from the UFC.
In MMA, there is one unspoken rule that every fighter knows. When someone taps, you let go. Simple. Respect the tap. Rousimar Palhares didn't. He squeezed and kept squeezing. After the tap, after the ref stepped in, sometimes even after the damage was already done. This guy had the most terrifying heel hook in the sport. Opponents would tap before he even locked it in. But Rousimar, he didn't stop, and eventually the UFC, the organization that lets people beat each other half to death, said, nope, you're done. So how does one of the best submission artists on earth get banned from the UFC for doing what he does best? That's what we're about to find out. This is the story of the most dangerous leg locker in MMA history and how he lost it all. Rousimar Palhares was not built in a gym. He was built in the dirt. Born in Doris do India, Brazil, he grew up in a shack. No electricity, no running water. At 7, he was already in the fields working to feed his family. And by the time that he hit his teens, his grip strength could crush bricks. His body, compact, dense, kind of like a tree stump. Hence the nickname, Toquinho. But what made him different wasn't just raw strength, it was obsession. At 15, he found Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It didn't matter that he had no money, he cleaned gyms just to be around the mats. Eventually, his talent caught the eye of Mario Bustamante, a UFC champion and a legend. Now, Bustamante didn't just see potential, he saw a problem for anyone who ever thought of standing in front of this guy. Palhares moved to Rio and joined Brazilian top team. It was there that the leg lock journey began. While others chased rear naked chokes and arm bars, Palhares locked in on legs. And not just any leg locks. He mastered the heel hook, a move so nasty it can shred your knee in seconds. Now what set him apart wasn't just technique, it was leverage. He had a low center of gravity and freakish flexibility. When he wrapped your leg, escape was basically fantasy. By the time he hit the ADCC and BJJ world stage, he was finishing elite grapplers in under a minute. Legs folded, screams echoed, matches ended fast. He didn't need a gas tank, he needed seconds. That kind of violence gets noticed, and the UFC came calling. And just like that, he was headed to the biggest stage in MMA, dragging ankles with him. Palhares touched down in the UFC like he had been shot out of a cannon. His debut was a quick submission. No hesitation, no wasted movement, just violence with a black belt. Then came Ivan Salivary, veteran, tough as nails. Palhares still ran through him. Then he took on Jeremy Horn and went to a unanimous decision. He finished Lucio Linhares in the first round, and he wasn't just a hype job, he was real. And he had one move that nobody wanted to see coming, the heel hook. Now most guys use it as a last resort, but for Palhares, it was his A plan. From the moment he touched your leg, the clock started ticking. He didn't sneak into position, he dragged you there. The entries were aggressive, the control airtight. Once he got to the heel, he didn't look for your reaction, he ended it. Defending it was a nightmare. Wrestlers didn't want to shoot. Strikers didn't want to kick. The fear was real. Joe Rogan called him one of the most dangerous leg lock specialists ever in the octagon. And he wasn't wrong. But here's the thing. As the highlight reel grew, so did the concern. Against Tomas Durwal, everything went sideways. Palhares grabbed the leg and ripped. Derwall tapped, the ref jumped in, Palhares kept twisting. It wasn't a slow release, it was a no release. Derwall lay on the canvas clutching his knee. Medical staff rushed in, fans started booing. The UFC handed Palhares a suspension. Dana White was blunt. You can't do that. Palhares said he didn't feel the tap. Now that excuse didn't land. One incident like that can get chalked up to adrenaline, but things did not stop there. It only got messier. He moved to middleweight, heel hooked Lucio Linares at UFC 107, then got TKO'd by Nate Marquardt. In 2012, he got knocked out by Hector Lombard and then popped for elevated testosterone. The Brazilian Commission hit him with a 9-month suspension.
Have you seen the new photos, the most recent photos of Rousimar Palhares?
Oh, yeah.
Jesus,
He was grappling, dude. He's just looking.
Fucking Christ. He looks like he's 250 pounds.
Dude, if that guy tripped and fell, I would just seriously just run out the room, dude. I would like, fuck that, dude. There's no way, man. I mean, those guys are tapping before, dude. And
yeah,
you just
it doesn't matter.
Shit off,
he just tears your shit apart.
That's insane, man.
He's so fucking thick right now. He's only like 5'7", and he's probably, no bullshit, 230 pounds. He's enormous right now.
Yeah.
So by the time that he fought Mike Pierce, the leash was short. Mike Pierce was relentless and a tough grinder. The fight was competitive until it wasn't. Palhares dropped to the leg, locked it in, and Pierce tapped furiously. The ref jumped on them. Palhares kept going. You can hear Pierce's cornermen screaming. You can see the ref trying to pry him off. By the time Palhares let go, it was too late. Pierce limped out with ligament damage. The UFC didn't wait. They cut him. No second chance, no let's talk, just you're done. The message was clear. This wasn't about wins or losses. This was about safety. And Palhares had just crossed the line again.
Times is those guys like the other guy's fault, or does he really just hold too long?
He definitely holds too long.
Yeah.
Just think when he's
a killer.
in competition, man. Yeah, he just doesn't want to let it go.
Yeah.
He wants, and they make him let it go, and he tried, even though he knew that they were going to get mad at him if he didn't let go, still didn't quite let go.
Yeah.
And they're like, get the fuck out of here. They kicked him out of the UFC, the first guy ever to get kicked out of the UFC for holding on to submission. He was released after holding on to a heel hook of Mike Pierce in 2013. Yeah.
After the Mike Pierce incident, Dana White did not mince words. He is done.
Is that the kind of incident that gives your league and your sport a bad name, and that bolsters the case of the Attorney General in a place like New York?
And this is the second incident we've had with Palhares, where he had the lock and he didn't let it go. Finally, he let it go, but yeah, I'm going to cut him too.
No press tour, no damage control, just a swift cut from the biggest fight promotion in the world. That kind of release does not happen often. Plenty of fighters bend the rules, few get kicked out for what happens after the bell. The UFC statement made it clear. It wasn't about skill, it was about trust, and Palhares had none left. Fighters took notice. Twitter and forums blew up with anger and fear. Fighters said they'd never accept a bout with him, not because he was unbeatable, but because he didn't respect the tap.
Rousimar Palhares, very known for like really cranking submissions, especially heel hooks, things like that, like really, really bad submissions to crank. And a lot of times, you know, it's the person's tapping, he's still going, which is fine. But once the referee touches you, you should be like ready to stop. Like once you're feeling the tapping, you're getting ready to let go. The second the referee touches you, it should be the happiest thing in the world for you, because the fight's over, you've won. You let it go. There's no need to do extra damage. You're just kind of being a dick if you keep. But he's kind of a dick.
Inside MMA circles, there's a line. You can throw elbows, choke a guy unconscious, break a nose, but when someone taps, you stop. Palhares didn't. That's why people weren't just upset, they were scared. Coaches spoke up. Athletic Commission started reviewing footage. His camp tried to spin it, said he's just intense, and said that he struggles to feel the moment. Mario Bustamante, his coach and a legend, admitted that there were issues in training. Palhares was hard to control. Sometimes even in sparring, he wouldn't ease up. Now that wasn't a good look. His stock plummeted. 1 month earlier, he was a title threat. Now, he was radioactive. The kind of guy who walks into a locker room and clears it out. even the fans turned on him. MMA isn't known for being soft, but when your own highlight reel looks like evidence in a lawsuit, people notice. Palhares' brand went from submission machine to liability. Sponsors vanished. Interview requests stopped. No big-name camp would take him in. And just like that, he became an exile. Not because he lost, but because he couldn't let go. Still, getting cut by the UFC isn't always the end. For some fighters, it is the start of a comeback. So, when the World Series of Fighting reached out, Palhares saw some daylight. A new chance, a fresh contract. But the question followed him everywhere. Had he learned anything? The World Series of Fighting didn't hesitate. They signed Palhares and handed him a golden ticket, a shot at the welterweight title. Now it was a gamble, but controversy sells and WSOF needed some attention. Palhares brought that in buckets. He faced Steve Carl for the belt. The fight ended exactly how you would expect, with a heel hook. Carl tapped, and this time, Palhares let go. Quickly, cleanly. For a moment, it looked like maybe, just maybe, he had turned the page. He promised a change, said he wanted to rebuild, compete, and do it the right way. WSOF gave him the full promo push, redemption arc, new beginning. MMA started buying in, and it worked, briefly. Then came John Fitch, in which he beat by submission at WSOF 16, and then Jake Shields. And that is when it all crumbled. Against Shields, the same script played out. Palhares had him in a Kimura, locked in the hold, Shields tapped, and he kept cranking. The ref dove in, still no release.
Palhares was uniquely terrifying because you knew that not only was he going to leg lock you, but he wasn't going to let it go.
That's illegal.
I mean, he even did it to Jake Shields. He got Jake Shields in a Kimura.
Yeah, I was there.
And didn't let it go.
Yeah. They started hitting him afterwards.
Yeah.
Because guys like that can really, that's your career.
They can ruin your career.
Ruin your career.
Yeah.
Shields, in frustration, swung back after the bell, and it wasn't hard to see why. Replays showed the tap, the pause, the extra torque, not once, not borderline, but blatant. WSOF launched an investigation. They suspended him, stripped him of the belt, called it dangerous conduct. Same issue, new cage, different logo. The Jake Shields incident erased whatever goodwill he had left. No more redemption, no more trust. It was clear now, this wasn't a mistake, it was a pattern. Coaches spoke out, again. Fighters refused to sign, again. The same conversations, just with a different backdrop. WSOF cut him loose. Now even smaller promotions hesitated. Booking him was risky, not for the matchup, but for the liability. His name became a warning. Promoters stopped returning calls. Teammates kept their distance. In an industry that is full of bruisers, Palhares stood out for all the wrong reasons. He wasn't feared for his power, he was avoided for his disregard. The heel hook that once made him a star now closed every door in front of him. No more belts, no more headlines, just a reputation too heavy to carry. After WSOF shut the door, Palhares did not disappear, he just drifted. He fought in some smaller shows in Europe, Russia, anywhere that still wanted the name. But the stages got dimmer, the opponents less threatening, the paychecks a fraction of what they used to be. He went from televised title fights to cards barely anyone streamed. Promoters booked him for more name value than competition, and even then there were questions. Referees were briefed, doctors stayed alert, opponents were warned. Every booking came with baggage. No one could trust how the fight would end. The shift was obvious. He never returned to a top-tier promotion. Not Bellator, not ONE, not even PFL. Too much risk, too little change. His legacy followed him everywhere, and not in a good way. But even as his MMA star faded, his name didn't vanish. Forums still brought him up whenever a fighter held on too long. Fans still remembered the grimaces, the screams, the delayed releases. Palhares became a slang, not a compliment. Even in grappling tournaments, there was tension. Guys didn't roll with him casually. His presence brought out hesitancy, not out of respect, but out of the unsportsmanlike behavior that he brings to the table. The damage wasn't just to others, it was to himself. He had burned the bridges that fighters cannot afford to lose. The sport moved on. New leg lock killers emerged. Guys like Ryan Hall, Gary Tonett, and Craig Jones. They took the same techniques, refined them, and added one thing Palhares lacked: control. But here's the irony. Technically, Palhares contributed to that evolution. His heel hook game forced the meta to adapt. Defenses improved because of him. But still, he will never get full credit, because his skill was never the issue. His choices were. That is what stuck. That is what people remember. Not the speed of the submission, but what happened after. Palhares' submission forced more policy changes than it did taps. After his run, the UFC tightened referee protocols. They started prepping officials differently for fighters with aggressive submissions. Training shifted from when to stop to how fast you intervene. It wasn't just about safety, it was about optics. Nobody wanted another scene where the ref looked powerless while someone's knee popped on live TV. Matchmakers got cautious. They began weighing more than skills when signing fighters. Control became a scouting category, and Palhares was the example they pointed to in saying, "Here is what we cannot allow." The ban set a precedent. Other fighters got cut for late strikes or dirty moves, but no one else got the label that stuck with Palhares. He wasn't just released, he was removed. That raised questions. Was it adrenaline, a momentary lapse, or something deeper? Sports psychologists weighed in. Some said it might have been instinct. Others called it impulse control. But the patterns were too consistent to ignore. Every time he had the chance to stop, he didn't. Whether it was the UFC or WSOF, the problem followed him. Cultural explanations were thrown around too. Different grappling environments, old school mentalities about toughness. But that didn't hold up either. Other BJJ specialists never had this issue. Plenty of Brazilians trained with the same intensity and still knew when enough was enough. The truth is, you cannot measure intention. You can only see the outcome. And in Palhares' case, the outcome was too often someone clutching a knee or screaming in pain. This wasn't a technical problem, it was an ethical one. In a sport that is built on violence, there is still a line, and that line is the tap. You don't cross it, not for a win, not for pride. Palhares crossed it more than once, and he paid for it. Today his name gets brought up in caution, not admiration. Even when his submissions are studied, they're shown with context. Yes, he innovated, but he also reminded the fight world why rules exist, and why some fighters don't just lose opportunities, they lose the benefit of the doubt. Rousimar Palhares could have been a UFC legend. He had the skill, he had the wins, but what he didn't have was control. He ignored the tap, ignored the ref, and in doing so, erased everything he built. The UFC didn't cut him because he wasn't good enough. They cut him because he wouldn't stop. In this sport, power matters, but restraint defines the pros. Palhares crossed the line, not once, not twice, enough times to make sure that he never got back. This wasn't a fall from grace, it was a self-sabotage in slow motion. And that is how a submission master became MMA's biggest flop.